All right, it's 12 noon. My name is Steve Orr. I'm the managing partner at Orr Group, and I wish to welcome you once again to our continuing series of webinars. This time around, we listened to what you asked us to focus on, and that is events of all types. Little known fact, perhaps, Orr Group got its start in the event business almost, 29 years ago. Doing galas and conventions and cultivation events, events of all type. And over the years, we have branched out into many, many other areas, but we can continue to consider events a vital part of what we do as an industry. And for all the good reasons we're going to talk about today. So one of the most challenging things about this pandemic, of course, is that it comes right at the time when many of us were launching our spring events. A lot of implications for our organizations, fundraising, production issues, the full gamut. So you asked us to talk about how we see other clients, how we're advising, and of course we want to hear from you as to, what is to be done. It's already, we're, almost the middle of April, so many of you are already dealing with the immediate issues upon you. So we'll make some comments initially about what's happening right now and where we think everybody is, but then we'll really try to focus on what do we do with the rest of the spring, and then as we look towards the fall, what should the focus there be. So it is clear that a large portion of most nonprofits, or many nonprofits, revenues come from events. It's a superb way to raise unrestricted funds. And as I say, our own business has gone from, has morphed into lots of other things, including capital campaigns, major gifts, and, outsourced all kinds of things, executive management services. But we continue to go back to the importance, the vital importance of bringing people together around our missions, creating not only a camaraderie, but an understanding of what it is we're doing at our organization. And, I think the impact on people, if those events are conducted properly, are really very powerful. And it leads, we know for sure as professionals, we all know that it leads to greater opportunities in the, cultivating major gift opportunities down the line. So events, they're also a great source of unrestricted funds, of course, and many of us need that, to supplement the programmatic funds that we're raising through foundations and other sources. So, most of us have, of course, run straight into a buzzsaw of the immediacy of what do we do? And so we, of course, want to focus on that today and go through that. A couple of housekeeping issues. As always, please ask questions through the Q&A, not the chat. Go ahead and chat if you wish. We'll watch that too. But if you want to pose questions, we're going to be really sensitive to and watch your questions today, because we know there's 1,000 details related to events that we can talk to. And we've really got some terrific people on the phone who are going to answer the questions today. So let me quickly summarize who's on the phone. I'll start with CJ. CJ's used to be our Chief Operating Officer. This year we moved him into a Vice President position because he is handling some of our larger clients in a variety of ways. He also has an extensive background in events. He's been with the firm for about 7 years. And I don't know how many events you've managed, CJ, but it's been a lot. And it's been advising on the production and really focusing specifically on the fundraising. So a lot of good experience there. Kelly Dunphy is a managing director, been with the firm for 13 years. Kelly, I've worked with you at least on 50 or 60 or 100 events. A long history of all type of events, including conferences and fundraising and non-fundraising kinds of events. So lots of experience to offer. Now, Patricia Gill is our newest member at Orr Group. Patricia, I think, came on the last year and a half or so. But you come with extensive event experience, both in the hotel space, so a lot of production related work, but also fundraising work. And you are currently grappling with several of our gala situations and other kinds of events and giving really valuable advice. So I wanted you to be part of this so that you can impart some of that knowledge. So we're going to break down the discussion today in, first of all, how do you make the decision right now, as to what is upon you, and that might just be a spring event coming up right this second. It might be something over the summer. It might even be, the fall. But what are the thoughts that go into that? and what decisions are we seeing our clients making. So we want to try to impact that. The next area of focus, we're going to really hone in on fundraising. How do I deal with fundraising, that's underway, that's halfway through, that's maybe completed, the event's tomorrow, but we're going to cancel the event. What do we do in that situation? Lots of dynamic issues there. Then we want to get in, because we heard a lot of questions last time about virtual events. Should we morph into something online? Is that going to be effective, both from a production and from a fundraising point of view? A lot of issues in that front. We want to specifically look at what's happening now in the spring, and then what's happening in the fall. There's probably slightly different ways to think about those two things. And then finally, we'll talk just generally about communication. How transparency. How are we dealing with all of our audiences that really care about this and who are invested in the events. So I'm going to start with Kelly. Kelly, if you can please provide us with the decision-making process overview. What do you see folks doing, and what do you advise?
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So I think at this point, a lot of decisions have already been made. Starting mid-March, people were already making decisions around postponing or canceling events. But I know that some organizations have events slated for late May or even into June, and you're in that moment where, now is the time that you need to be deciding what you want to do. And, what I've been counseling organizations I work with on, what I've been seeing others doing, is they're really trying to decide, well, do we postpone it to the fall? Do we cancel it entirely and just, pick it back up next year? Do we transition to some kind of virtual event in the short term? These are all, really critical questions, and there's different questions that go into each of those. So let's just for a second focus on, okay, let's say you want to consider postponing your event to the fall. There's a lot of things you need to consider that go along with that. How will that impact your fiscal year? What else do you already have slated for the fall, and how would moving an event from the spring to the fall impact what you already have planned there? Your event volunteer leaders and any talent that you may have secured for the program, would they still be able to participate moving it to the fall? Will your venue work with you on doing that? So all those things you need to think about. And it's like, I think the same goes along for, do you cancel for this year and just pick it back up for next year? Again, will your venue work with you on doing that? Will your honorees and talent, are they available a year from now? And all along the way, you should be engaging your board and your key event leaders in these conversations with you. You want their perspective, you want their buy-in, of course. So it's, making sure you have the right people around the table as you're considering all of these issues.
Kelly, can I ask you, are you finding that venues and other production-related vendors are sympathetic in this environment? And, is it possible easily to move an event to the fall just from the logistics?
Right. I think it depends. In the organizations that I'm working most closely with right now on these issues, they have had events, they're long-standing events, right? They've been going on for 5 or 10 or sometimes even years longer than that. And they have these long-standing relationships with venues as well as other event vendors. And so that's going a long way when you already have this existing relationship. I know one organization, they have an annual gala in early May, and they've been at the same venue for many years. And even though it's not, in the terms of the contract to do this, the venue decided to go ahead and move the deposit from this year to next year, even though the contract said they could only move it basically to a date later in this calendar year. They went ahead and made that decision. I do think, like we're seeing, I think in many industries and in all aspects of our lives and our, professional lives too, that companies are in many ways willing to work with us, and they are sympathetic. So I think the most important thing is just, picking up the phone and having that conversation, seeing what that venue or other vendor is willing to do, because I think they see the bigger picture, and they know, they want to keep you as a client and a customer for the long term. So I can't say that's going to be the case across the board, but I think people are more sympathetic right now.
Yeah, I think that's generally true, and we'll hear more from Patricia, I know, on that issue, because she's got a lot of experience in that, working on that right in this very moment. I have a question here. There are organizations that I think are listening in today who have a lot of events during the course of the summer and really rely on that revenue, for the rest of the year. What would you say to, right now making a decision about August? Is that an event you want to postpone right now? Or because I would think, through the spring, most events are, there's going to be an action of postponement or going viral or virtual or whatever. But what would you say about August?
Yeah, I think for August or even getting into the fall, I'm paying attention to the news and seeing some polls just in the last 24, 48 hours, national polls, trying to get a sense of how people are really feeling about when they're comfortable relaxing the social distancing requirement, regardless of whatever the government or health officials say down the line. How personally are they feeling about being comfortable going back out? And I saw one yesterday that had, I think, over 50% of people saying they either, I think it's about, 50% of people saying either not for another 3 months or 6 months or more. So I think the big question about August and beyond is, even if things are technically opened up by then, what are your constituents and your potential donors and audiences going to feel comfortable with? Are they going to feel comfortable getting back into that ballroom, in October? Are they going to feel comfortable even going out onto a golf course if you have a golf event in the fall? So I think it's hard to say at this point to what human nature is going to feel like at that point. So I think, if we were to recommend something around this, it's a bit of a wait and see, not make a decision right now about your late summer or fall events, but keep paying attention.
So let's delve into fundraising, because the impacts, of course, on our donors and our need, really, I would say our desire, but mostly our need to keep our donors part of us and keep us engaged, keep them engaged and keep them supportive. So let's break it into spring events and then fall events. So just for the spring events, Kelly, I'll stay with you and then move on. How, if you have an event that's been canceled, let's say for June, what actions should be taken, in the next couple of months to try to ensure, that fundraising continues in a robust manner that you'd fully expect? As we know, most of the biggest part of the fundraising for any gala happens in the last month or two. And then what do you do with those who already committed?
Yes. Okay. So what I've been seeing is in a situation like that, the most important thing is to pick up the phone and reach out to those donors, number one, who've already committed to the event, and appeal to them if they're able to continue with their contribution and not cancel it or move it to the next year. That the need that they would be supporting is just as important as it was before all of this. So to make that appeal to them to continue with their contribution. I think for donors who perhaps hadn't made their contribution yet, but have been repeat supporters of the event, so they clearly care about your organization, still make that appeal to them, still ask them to contribute in the June timeframe, even though it's not tied to an event anymore. We're seeing a lot of positive responses to that. I won't say it'll be 100% return, but I think probably I'm seeing, at least in one organization, 80% or more of donors are continuing with their pledge. So that's one thing for those that have already committed or those longtime donors. I think another thing that, and we're going to get into kind of virtual events a little bit later on, but if you have made that decision to move some portion of the event into an online platform or virtual platform, be creative and think about all the different ways that you could include call to actions and appeals through that event, so that it's not a complete lost cause for fundraising just because you're canceling or postponing or transitioning your event to something virtual. You know, do not be afraid to still ask right now. But I think it's how you kind of position it. It's, you know, if you're still able to do this, you know, can we count on you?
Patricia, I know you have been working with a couple of clients that, you know, very large gala outcome expectations. And I know you're in the thick of, you know, talking to sponsors who have either committed or about to commit. Are they continuing to commit? If they have committed, are they sticking around? What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question that I've been ingrained with for the past couple of weeks. So it is definitely top of mind. You know, I think what I have seen through my experience thus far is working directly with our leadership. So whether it's the gala chair, the board of directors, whoever the main relationship managers are, to make sure they're well informed about the messaging and making those personal calls and using their you know, personal strategies via email or just picking up the phone, as Kelly mentioned, is proving to be really impactful and successful for those who have secured a lot of the funds in the past. You know, those are the ones that have the relationships. And so by doing something as quick as a, you know, an individual email to somebody is really honing in on how special they are as a donor and really increasing the opportunity for a recommitment.
So let's go to the fall events, and then if we have questions, we can sort of look at the totality of all of this. But for fall, CJ, I'll start with you on issues related to fundraising. Are you changing tactics? Are you seeing nonprofits do things differently in advance of, you know, the fundraising outcomes expected in the fall, like from leadership to individual table sales to sponsorships for conferences? What are you seeing?
Yeah, good question, because a lot of organizations have transitioned their events to the fall, and fundraising right now, to go out and ask for a table right now for a fall event is going to be pretty tough. So what you should do is work with your leadership, your honorees, your co-chairs, and get everything ready to press the go button for when things do calm down or when they're comfortable. You can be doing prospecting right now. You can be doing your research. You can be doing everything on the back end to make sure that you're prepared for when this does settle down a little bit. And also for your honorees and for your leadership, you're okay to talk to them about fundraising. I mean, if you have a good relationship with your co-chairs and such, and you know, they get the drill, they know where you are in all of this, then you can feel free to talk to them about that and their commitment to this, and you know, what they're thinking, because you should have a very strong relationship where that's okay. Come to the fall, hopefully things do settle in June or July and August. Then you have, you know, 2 months there. As you know, after Labor Day, everything's very busy anyway, but it'll just be extra busy because you'll need to be bringing in a lot more revenue in a shorter amount of time. So it's going to put a lot of strain on everybody. I mean, this is putting strain on everyone as is, and it definitely will put strain going into the fall.
So with your leadership, which we know is vital, you know, to be successful with these events, are you seeing that conversations at this moment there is receptivity to talking about, leading, organizing committees, from a fundraising point of view, being successful, even though you're not talking about executing right now?
Yeah, I don't have a problem, and I've seen people being open to conversations. Everybody is open to discussion right now. Everybody wants to talk. You know, everyone's sitting at home looking at the news. You know, people do want to talk and look forward to things. I don't think there's any problem with communication. Like Patricia and Kelly just hit the nail on the head. Communicating with your donors during this time is probably more important than it ever has been. And communicating with your honorees and leadership is just the same. You could still be talking to them about what they're thinking, and then also talk to them about the fall event. You know, they'll be open about it. And if they're okay trying to, do research and trying to talk to them about the fundraising stuff, that's great. Take advantage of that, use it, work with them on it. And if they're not, then don't. But no matter what, I don't think you have any harm in talking to leadership, talking to honorees, and having open dialogue, much to what Patricia and Kelly talked about.
I just couldn't agree with you more. We've been advising all the way through, this pandemic, that communication is number one. It's not asking for gifts, it's communicating, it's listening, it's sharing, all of our concerns. And that has worked. I mean, and that needs to continue really to be the primary steps, the first steps that we all take in any kind of re-engagement. If you haven't re-engaged yet, you should. And you're absolutely right, CJ, that, just communication is so key. We have a good question, Kelly. I'm going to direct to you. It is interesting. Thank you for the question. You're pointing out that, well, if we deleted, or pushed back or otherwise canceled an event, is this the moment to try to convert that donor into a much longer range major giver in lieu of a transactional gift? Is this the time to do that, Kelly?
Yes, I think we should definitely try to do that. It might not work for every donor, but I think this goes back to what you were just saying, Steve and CJ, about the importance of communication, regardless if someone has been a more transactional event donor or they've been a more committed donor. I think still pick up the phone and reach out to them or send them an email just to check in to see how they're doing. And if you have made that decision to change your event, postponing it or canceling it, letting them know, acknowledging how much their support has meant and how it's had an impact in the previous years, and see if they're willing to have a conversation about continuing that gift, even though, it's not tied to the sort of more traditional event benefits that you might get. My experience, and I know this isn't across the board, but my experience is that more and more event donors are less concerned with the sort of traditional event benefits they get. I think in a lot of cases, people want to be in that room with people that they can network with and meet, and but if they truly have a connection to your cause and care about it, I think that's something that you can try to leverage. But it all comes back to just starting the conversation and trying to suss out, how much they do care about the cause. And it really will not cause any harm for you to ask if they'd be willing to continue their gift.
Yeah.
And
Steve,
Kelly,
I wanna,
yeah, go ahead, CJ.
sorry, can I just dovetail on that a little bit? What Kelly was talking about, now is probably one of the better opportunities to turn a transactional donor into a longer term donor, because throughout everyone's life, everyone will ask, where were you in 9/11? Where were you during the financial crisis? Where were you during COVID? And if you implant your organization as one of those memories during this time as a positive one, and one where you had a great conversation about what you're doing, what they're thinking, they will remember that. And you can come back to that in a few months down the line. So right now, I think is actually a really great opportunity to turn donors that have once been transactional into longer term transformational. And then the second part, I saw someone put a question on the Q&A about they're looking for an honoree in the fall and they don't have one yet. That's a really interesting question, because it would be really tough to go to any, your traditional type of company right now and say, hey, would you like to be honored? And, this is $100,000 give or get. You might have to think of a little bit differently about prospects. Maybe immediately in your network that you're very close with already. That's your board members or those traditional type of honorees that aren't all that sexy and new, but they're tried and true. And then the other one might be interesting of thinking about, is there any of your prospects that where their company's doing something very interesting related to COVID right now? Or if their company has done something really exceptional in this time period that you could recognize at your gala in the fall. So say, for example, you're close with the CEO of some corporation and you know that they're doing something very positive during this time. Use this as an opportunity to ask them to be honored, to recognize them for that commitment. And I think that will be really impactful in the fall. And you could have them tell their story in the fall. I think that'll be good for your program, and people will be interested in learning more.
That's exactly what we did during 9/11. And I'm not going to give the example because I can't use the name, but it's exactly right. Link it to, something that organization is doing that's really powerful now, and, honor them for that. And in the context of your event, I think that's a really smart thing to do. Another thing I was going to add, CJ, is before you so rudely interrupted me. No, I'm okay. This happens all the time. Was like, we have an organization that we've been literally managing their event. I think this is the 19th year. And because it's become such an ingrained event, and everyone, they look forward to it every year because they know what the mission is of the organization. They truly support it, and they really enjoy the networking, and they really enjoy the people who are putting it together. And while some of that, we have canceled the event, but while that's not going to happen, a lot of that's not going to happen. The ability, as Kelly and both CJ were saying, of transitioning that to a longer term commitment is absolutely right. So there are, I think, 35 letters literally going out today to do just that, to ask them to convert that support over into a longer term engagement. And I'm betting that 95% of those folks will say, sure. Kelly, you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do want to acknowledge that, there will always be individual donors and corporate donors that are being hard hit right now by the economic impact of all of this. And they won't be able to continue with their commitment or become a first-time donor to you right now. But still, I think making that outreach and trying to have that conversation is the beginning of a different kind of conversation with them, and that will go towards building a longer term relationship. And they'll remember, the sort of the empathy that you showed them, and that you were a good listener as they are going through this. And hopefully they do come back stronger than ever. And so next year, they're ready to make that commitment to you again.
We can come back to fundraising, but Patricia, I want to take advantage of your extensive production experience and ask you the question of, you can reflect on the spring, but I'm thinking also about the fall. Are you making those commitments now? What are the special issues because of the situation now that we all need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I've had a chance to collaborate with some of our other team leads here at Orr Group, Katie Macris, Caroline Moulton, Juliana Sloper, and what we're finding is that there's a trend that events in the fall are moving forward confidently. We're just doing our due diligence by preparing for multiple scenarios. So that can look like a couple of different things. So we're reworking timelines, we're evolving strategies, we're shifting budgets around, and we're doing a lot of the back end work that can be done now that won't be time misspent in the long run. And also looking at a variety of contingency plans, regardless of what those are, just to make sure that we're prepared. So, when we're talking about, from a planning and production perspective, we can do, we can look at designing, we can look at print materials, we can build out volunteer plans, run a show. These types of things take time. Having the time now to do it is great. And again, it's not time misspent. Then, starting to have those conversations now, we're advising to be transparent to a similar capacity that we are with our donors, but with our vendors. They're going through the same uncertainty that we are. So keeping them looped in as to what we're currently considering and how this may shift the contract, and really understanding what our contract clauses are and the implications for both them as well as us now versus in the long run or in the fall has certainly shifted us to be more beneficial in the long run. And then it's also increasing the loyalty with them too, receiving their buy-in from the beginning of, if I were to go this direction, what do you think? How would this affect the overall program of the event? And then I think it's also, when we're looking at contingency plans, it's now starting to have those conversations with this trend of potentially going virtual. Maybe you're not currently considering that, but should we get to a point towards the end of the summer and the fall where those conversations you're going to be more beneficial having those conversations now versus later. So understanding what portions of your event, if any, have the capacity to move online, whether it's an auction or your keynote speaker, your fundraising, are you set up from a staff perspective or a budgetary perspective to be able to make that transformation should you end up getting to that point in the fall?
Can you reflect, Patricia, because I know you're dealing with a bunch of these things, about contractual issues specifically on vendors that you're coming in and just saying, you know, we're going to have to move it forward or not do it at all? I mean, this is a moment where I think what you're going to say, and what I certainly feel, is people are being really incredibly generous, and call it patriotic if you want, you know, understanding what we're all going through and just saying, you know what, I'm going to sacrifice just like you're sacrificing. But what do you say? You're in the trenches on that.
Yeah, I think we have been so pleasantly surprised with the conversations we've been having with vendors, especially venues who, you know, have been, a lot of them, hotels included, you know, have been hit harder than a lot of us. And they are the ones that are actually being the most genuinely, you know, generous and caring in their contract clauses and extending, you know, cancellation policies, waiving deposits, applying deposits to the next, to a different time in the future. And I think the most important thing that I have gathered from all of this is, you know, it goes back to transparency and, you know, going back to them being in the same position we are. You know, for those that don't have COVID-19 as part of the force majeure clause now, we're seeing addendums being created to include that for already signed contracts, in addition to those who potentially are looking to move their event to the fall or who are in contract negotiations. It's a standard conversation now. They have a, you know, there's a couple of different forms of the language, but they're adding it, you know, not necessarily just by having people request it, but asking if we would like to include it. And that is shifting us in the right direction of making sure that everybody's covered regardless of the scenario.
Yeah, that's a really great thing. So there's a good question here that anyone who wants to answer it, but you know, as we plan to the fall, whether it's planning for a budget or whether it's planning for revenue, you know, are we planning for higher outcomes, i.e. net outcomes, or are we planning for lower? How are we communicating that to our leadership and to our various constituents who are, you know, supporting us? Anybody have a view on that? I haven't really thought too much about that myself.
Kelly,
I can talk about it just because I'm in the trenches right now with an organization and trying to figure this out. For fall events, we are projecting we will be down. There's no sort of magic number, I don't think, on what that decrease will look like percentage wise. And this organization's on a July 1 fiscal year, so we're in the budgeting process right now too. And I mean, we're sort of using a working number of, we think we'll budget to be 50% down in revenue just for the fall events. But then as we're looking to the spring, again, it's hard to say. We don't know what people will really feel like in a year from now, if they'll be comfortable going back into big rooms of lots of people. But we do know sort of anecdotally, our leadership that we already have in place for spring events are really, you know, excited and on board about getting back in the saddle for the event next year. So, you know, I think we're projecting will probably be the same, but not increase next year. So I think now is the time to be more conservative in terms of event revenue, especially as you're budgeting, and, you know, you need to make decisions based on that revenue coming in. So I think my counsel is to be more conservative.
Yeah, a couple of things you made me just think about there. First of all, people really like events, right? They like to go to chef cook-offs. They like to go to golf tournaments. They like, you know, they want to be with people. I mean, we're human beings. We all want to be, you know, with others. So understanding that, but also people are highly sympathetic with what's going on in the world right now. And so again, it comes down to the advice that you all gave in the beginning. You know, if there's enough connectivity between you and the donor around the cause, it is the perfect moment to speak to that other human being as like, look, we need your help more than ever. Try to transition that person from, you know, we'll get back to the events, whether it's next fall or next spring, but we still desperately need your help, and please do that now. And you know, Patricia, as you said, I think people are reacting really well to that. You know, we're not seeing a big fall off in existing commitments. Remains to be seen in incremental commitments for sure. CJ, were you going to add something to that? No? Okay. So a lot of you are asking questions about virtual events, and I haven't answered any of those because we're going to move to that next. So we can move back to some of these other questions, but let's move to virtual events. Everyone asks, I'm finding, well, gosh, if we aren't going to do a physical event, let's just move it to virtual. And I think there's more complication in that than would meet the eye. But Patricia, if you could start us off just by defining what are virtual events, what are the varieties that we might think about?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and we're getting it a lot, certainly. But in broad strokes, a virtual event is an online-only event where your attendees are connecting remotely for wherever they are, instead of gathering in person. So while they don't require food and beverage, they do require the same amount of attention and care and detail that an in-person event would have, marketing plans, engaging content, good data. The only thing that's really missing is the venue and the attendees. And yes, they definitely range in complexity. You can have something as, basic as a webinar like today to an online workout class. It could look like a community building event, like a, Giving Tuesday, all the way to a, complex benefit concert with a fully streamed live gala program. And then everything in between, hybrid virtual events and so forth.
Okay. So CJ, if you'll take those definitions and talk about sort of the benefits and the challenges, because there are plenty.
Yeah, well, the benefits is that you're definitely bringing together your donors in a very difficult situation with what you've been dealt with, right? You have no choice. So bringing together people in a virtual event is better than nothing. You've created that content anyway, right? You've gone through the production time. You've talked about the content. You've created it, and then you could also repurpose it for future use. Your benefit of going digital is, of course, you're seen as being socially responsible. You've listened to the CDC. You've even for events that are a little bit further out. So you're saying, I want to keep our donors safe. It's lower in production costs. It doesn't cost too much to get one of these Zoom webinars or whatever have you. And it's convenient. It's probably, I bet if I pulled this conversation, I'd say, or the people in this conversation, and ask, have you in the past few weeks done a Zoom call with friends that you probably haven't seen in the past 5 or 10 years? You'd probably say yes. So what it does is it brings together a lot of people that wouldn't traditionally have been able to get together because it's convenient. So a lot of people that weren't going to attend the event originally might dial into this. The other benefit of the virtual event is you still can raise money. I mean, you could do an on-site ask via Zoom. You can do it in the chat function. You can do it through a slide deck. You can do it through your program. You can even do a fund auction on technology. I mean, it's not as great as being in a seat and raising your hand in front of everybody, but it's still fun and you can do it. So the downside is that you don't have that live engagement. It's harder to get the passion from a donor when you talk about that mission moment. It's a little bit harder to do on a virtual setting. Your participation might not be as great as it is in person because people are distracted. People are sitting and they can talk to their kids or whoever. And it's a little bit harder to hold their attention for an hour or two. And then just the other con is that technology isn't 100%. Everyone's been hearing about the Zoom bombings and all that other fun stuff. But we've come leaps and bounds in terms of technology where we were a year or two ago, leaps and bounds. And so we're almost there, but there are those instances where it doesn't work. And, you just want to make sure to test it and make sure it'll work with the amount of audience that you expect, and just make sure it's foolproof, because the last thing you want is something bad to happen. So those are the good and the bad.
So CJ, on the, you in particular, but many of us at Orr Group at least have had quite a bit of success in encouraging organizations to launch specific COVID-related funds. Requests with actual fundraising going on right now. And there are a number of success stories emerging. So when we get to, the issue of virtual events, is it more propitious for organizations, say, that are in the healthcare industry who have a direct message about what they are doing to assist patients and so forth? If you're a hospital, for example, is this a good time to do something virtually by webinar or by whatever means you want? But is that a direct hit where it could become a direct fundraiser and maybe a substitute for an existing gala or other activity? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so like let's use hospitals example. Most hospitals have a fundraising department that are sitting there probably raising funds for this immediate need right now. We need masks, we need ventilators, we need whatever. To help in that effort, it's absolutely in their best interest to host a webinar or an event so that their CEO or whoever can get on a communication channel via webinar or whatever it may be and discuss about what they're seeing, what their needs are. So I think for those first responders, absolutely, I know that it's crunch time and you need to be fully focused on everything that you're doing, but you can also use this as an opportunity to raise funds to fund exactly what you need. So we're seeing a lot of like hospitals and other organizations doing that. We're also seeing a lot of organizations who aren't necessarily directly involved, like so, 1 degree outside of a hospital or like a city harvest or something like that, doing COVID funds as well. Because the interesting thing about this pandemic is it affects everybody. So everyone, every nonprofit can probably make a tie to how their mission has been affected by COVID. So you could probably read the story that says why a COVID fund will be especially effective right now for everyone involved in your network or beneficiary of your mission. So we're seeing a lot of organizations launch funds or special initiatives because it's universal. It affects everybody, which is sad to say, but truth.
So you mentioned Zoom, and I mean, we at Orr Group, we've been using Zoom for, 2 years, and we use it for every meeting, internal, external. We encourage every client to get on it because it's just such a wonderful thing for, not just for moments like this, but just for efficiency and so forth. But I'm getting a good question here that I'm not sure who wants to answer, but I'll just throw it out there. When we think about doing a virtual event on, via technology, what is the best, or what are options for using platforms that enable donations, to be made right online or right on that site?
Yeah.
DJ, is that for you?
I think actually, Patricia, you've been researching a few, I believe, right?
Yeah, there's a lot out there, and I think the information can definitely get overwhelming. In our, even over the past couple of weeks, I've had a couple of calls, and just off the top of my mind, one cause is one platform that I know houses it all, and I'm sure they have competitors, Greater Giving, GiveSmart, and so forth. It's how, when you're looking at trying to select a platform or software, I think you're looking for a couple of different things. It's one, can it capture the data that you're looking for? And that is dependent on the type of event you're doing. So do you have an auction? You definitely want to be able to shift that auction online. Do you want to initiate a text to give opportunity as part of your appeal? Making sure it has that. Being able to do peer-to-peer fundraising through community events, can look like a lot of different things. I think, one cause being one of them, I know is all encompassing, but there are definitely more than that.
Okay, that's good. There's another question that I think is really a great one because it's from someone who works in a healthcare organization. They're not being specific, maybe it's a hospital, but they have an event in August and the theme has not been COVID. And of course, they're getting tepid responses at this moment to that. And the question is, should we convert that over to a COVID, appeal? And I think, I work with a lot of healthcare institutions, and I think it would be smart in your case to do a hybrid, to, yes, interject COVID, because if you've been a direct participant in providing patient care services, you can talk about that. You should talk about that. You can talk about what you did. You can talk about what the needs continue to be. But I am fairly certain that in short order, we are going to get back to the business of healthcare, in a much broader sense. I mean, for a moment in time, we've suspended elective care. And, I mean, someone asked on the media this morning, I know heart attacks are still happening, but we're just not seeing as much traffic in the hospital. Well, I think we're going to get back, to all the other forms of service. So maybe doing a hybrid, because we can't neglect those other services. But Kelly, you do a ton of healthcare work. What do you think on that?
No, I completely agree. I think that's right. Like with all of our missions, I mean, the need has not gone away, right? So I think we have to be prepared for the next phase when the COVID crisis begins to slow down, and we have to get back to our usual business, right? And we can't stop preparing for that, so that when that moment does come, you're ready to be back out there raising funds around all the healthcare needs that your organization has. So I wouldn't slow down on any of your prep work and your strategy in those areas. It's just maybe you're not asking for as many of those gifts right now, and you push it out by a couple months. But again, that need is still going to be there, and be ready for that when that moment comes.
So here's an interesting one, and I'm going to be curious to see who can answer it. We have a golf tournament scheduled, in the summer, and the question they're getting from their board is, can it be turned into a virtual event? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to. I know that I have an informal, fun game of poker with a group regularly, and I've been searching all around for a way to do that without joining some crazy poker group, over in Bermuda. And I haven't found the solution how you do that yet. But does anybody have any answer on the golf thing? It sounds like fun, but I'm not sure how you do it.
I would say any endurance event. I mean, I don't know if golf is endurance, but I would kind of qualify it as. It's possible to turn virtually. And yes, it's going to look a little bit different, but we've seen a lot of interesting and really creative examples of those types of endurance or some sort of sporting event shifting to an online platform where you're basically inviting your donors and constituents to participate and do the same act of whatever sport it is, or walk or 5K or golf outing, but do it on their own time. And that opening up that opportunity for them to do it at the beginning of the summer versus a later summer, depending on their golf tournament or their golf clubs, restrictions. If they can't do it there, can they still do the fundraising and so forth, and participate as a sponsor, and then actually do the act of the golfing later, with intermittent communication plans throughout via social media and so forth, encouraging them along the way. I think we've seen some really, really great success with those types of opportunities, but kind of leaving it up to the individual to do it at their own time and their own pace.
So we've got about 12 minutes left. We're trying to get to all your questions. So if you have more, please send. I'm going to go, though, to our last category we generally wanted to cover, which is communicating whatever new strategy you're coming up with. So the question would be, how transparent should you be when with donors, let's say, who've already committed, or you want to commit? Do you tell them the full story and all the concerns? Do you not? At what point do you do that? Patricia, why don't you start? Kelly, you can take it from there.
I think it goes back to what you were saying. Well, everybody has said thus far, which, you want to be as honest as possible, and honesty is currently working. So as long as you are communicating the need, we have been receiving really positive responses from those who are thankful for those who are, providing a good picture of how this is currently affecting their organization, and increasing the likelihood of them recommitting or supporting, and the authenticity is really proving to be impactful.
Excuse me. CJ, take over for a second.
What do you think, CJ?
I was actually, I think in the beginning, Patricia, is you, and then Kelly, I think you wanted to go after that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I agree with everything Patricia said. And, I would say, don't miss the opportunity to communicate to a wider audience as well. I'm seeing some questions about, well, if we can't really turn a gala into a virtual event, if that's not really going to work for us, let's say you don't feel like you have, really kind of unique program offering that would, attract people to joining you virtually. And so you've decided not to do that. What do you replace that gala with? I think, there's lots of opportunities around digital campaigns, email campaigns, to your much wider audience than just your sort of event audience. So I would think about, any changes you're making around events, not just communicating it just to that event audience, but to your larger community, because you never know, people might, want to support at any level that they can.
One good suggestion in general communication is to ask people's opinion. If we're doing capital campaigns, we are always first asking everyone's opinion of, what do you think of this case statement? What do you think of what we're trying to raise money for? And that works extremely well. People want to be heard. I think the same thing exists with events. So, a communication tactic would simply be, what do you think we should do? And what would, I would very much like to keep your support, as you've always done. Under what conditions would you like to see that would help us accomplish that? So that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. CJ, you have anything else you want to add on communication?
Just the last piece I would say is, after it's in communication, but especially with an event, you would approach it like you would with fundraising, top down. So you work with your honorees, your co-chairs, your gala committee, then to your table buyers, and then to your ticket buyers in terms of communication. And, in the ticket buyer bucket, there's probably going to be mass email or something along those lines, or maybe a one-off email or an individual email. And it gets a little bit less personal as you go down the line. But, I would have the same approach to communication as I would with fundraising, just top down.
So a couple of messages came in around, what's the shelf life of COVID? And is there a saturation moment? I think there are interesting ways of answering that, which I will ask some of you to do. But, is this the thing that we should continue to focus on? And is it overwhelming? And is it, too much for the donor? And on that topic, I'm going to say it's absolutely not too much for the donor. I have listened to so many people, that's the key word, listened to so many people share their concerns about what their personal situation is. I mean, imagine people are sitting, as we all are, at home. Imagine those who are sitting alone at home and are really concerned, and don't have many people to talk to. Just talking, listening, very, very important. So it's not overwhelming to talk about their concerns or listen to their concerns. It's not overwhelming to ask them to be supportive about something they're concerned about that we're providing a solution for. I think the worst thing that can happen right now is being afraid to communicate aggressively with donors, people, friends. That's probably the number one. But what is, we've talked a little bit about the saturation point for COVID, but anyone have a perspective there?
I don't know how to measure when this will happen, but I have to imagine that at some point, maybe once we're through the sort of acute crisis portion of it, that people will want to hear about other things, right? They'll want to receive communications from you and hear about, how you're doing and with your programs and how the people you serve are doing, and what your plans are for the year ahead. So again, I don't know when that moment will be. I do think we will get there though. I also saw a question about how, to sort of manage the timing of all these different things. If you're moving like a spring event into the fall and then also doing like a mail appeal and an email appeal. which is a great question. And that's why I think at the beginning I said, if you are making that decision to move the event to the fall, you have to think about what else you already have planned, right? And are you cannibalizing audiences? If you know, those two events that are now going to exist in the same sort of season, are they totally different types of events attracting different audiences? Then I think you're okay. You have to think about staff time, of course, and what it's going to take there. But then with appeals, like, you know, direct marketing campaigns and things like that, I think we need to just remind ourselves that the more we ask, the better. The sort of approach is you ask multiple times a year through direct marketing campaigns and those kinds of appeals. So I think it's okay to be asking people multiple times through those types of channels. But on the event side, really think about, are your events, you know, trying to reach different audiences? And if they are, then I think you're okay having them, you know, closer together.
And one brilliant suggestion we're getting from one of our close contact colleagues out there is that, you know, for any event like a golf event or walking or running or whatever, I am sure there are apps that will track how far you went and how, you know, did you get a par? You know, did you triple bogey? Are you being honest? You know, they might be able to track if you're being honest, but there are ways, creative ways, entrepreneurial ways to get out there and have, you know, events that this would assume that, you know, there's some, a golf course is open, for example, and that you can actually go out and walk, which I think in most cases you can. So, you know, there are creative ways to go about these things. This is a moment to just sit back for a second, strategize, be creative, and assume that your donor base really care about your issue and just stay focused on that. And of course, be sensitive to creating a message that will appeal to their concern at the moment. And if you are directly providing, you know, response in any way, or even indirectly, as CJ, I think you said, you know, focus on that, bring that to their attention, ask for support around it. It's fair game, and I think people even expect it and like it at some level. So any questions that, oh, there's more coming. Well, I think we answered that. So the one thing I really want to emphasize, because we're getting close to the end, we listen to your suggestions as to what issues we might want to address. For next week, we're thinking about capital campaigns at large, because we're getting all kinds of questions from our existing clients and from you coming through the webinar. It's an issue that has all kinds of dynamics, you know, not dissimilar to events. So that's our thought for next week. But we are starting to do more and more of these because they are effective and they're a great way to communicate, and people seem to enjoy. The other part of it is the survey. We will send out a survey very soon after we close the window on this. And please respond. We actually read them and listen to them and make corrections according to your suggestions. So all of that is fair game. Final comments from my panelists. Anything?
No, it's one of the dangers of Zoom is if you start coughing everywhere, there's nothing you can do about it.
Shouldn't be drinking water through it. It is water. Okay.
I will say, Steve, going back to your creativity, one of my favorite examples, we've had a really great client that has gone a completely different direction, and goes back to the hybrid events that you alluded to. But, you know, going from a 1,000-person gala to a new reimagined event campaign, you know, over the course of the next 3 months, and involving multiple different communication efforts and, you know, broadening their audience while still also inviting those, you know, lead sponsors and individuals, tiered out individuals later for an event in the fall for some sort of, you know, smaller, more intimate, unique VIP reception, I thought was such a wonderful way to move forward during this time where you're really listening to what your donors want. You are still achieving your goals by, you know, spreading your message and increasing awareness. And, you know, I think that creativity is what we are seeing has been super successful recently with our partners, and making sure that, you know, we're staying flexible, but, you know, maintaining our course through the fall.
And one final suggestion I might have is cultivation events. It's actually a really good time to do Zoom cultivation events on specific topics. you know, whether it's around a campaign that's midway through or it's the launch of a campaign. I've been on so many calls like that recently, I can't tell you, and people really enjoy it. This is a moment where they want to participate. They want to be asked their opinion. They want to be at the table. And now we have this wonderful vehicle, which allows many vehicles, you know, Google, Blue Jeans, lots of different ways to do this, but there's ways to, you know, virtually get in front of people in crowds, and it works. You can share documents and all that wonderful stuff. So I would encourage everyone to do that. And the last thing I'll say is galas aren't going away. People like to get together, like to congregate, like to network. They like to be recognized. All those features are going to continue. It's just a matter of, you know, when. So with that, have a wonderful day. Thanks for tuning in. We will hope to speak with you or listen, have you listen to us next week, and we will listen to you if you'll respond to the survey. Yes, Kelly?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in the email that goes out with the survey will also be our contact information. If you have any additional questions, you can reach us that way.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.